Ajahn Amaro will be taking a break this evening. And we'll start with 3 bows. We'll do the first part of the evening chanting in English on page 19 of the Brown Book. To the Blessed One, the Lord, who fully attained perfect enlightenment, to the teaching which he expounded so well, and to the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, to these the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, we render with offerings a rightful homage. It is well for us that the Blessed One, having attained liberation, still had compassion for later generations. May these simple offerings be accepted for our long-lasting benefit and for the happiness it gives us. The Lord, the perfectly enlightened and blessed One, I render homage to the Buddha, the Blessed One. The teaching so completely explained by him, I bow to the Dhamma. The Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, I bow to the Sangha. Now let us pay preliminary homage to the Buddha, homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened One. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened One. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened One. And we'll bow 3 times. Do the chant on page 68 of the golden colored book. Avijja pacaya sankhara sankhara pacaya vinyanang vinyana pacaya namarupang namarupa pacaya salayatanang salayatana pacaya pasopasa pacaya vedana vedana Pachaya tanha pachaya upadana pachaya bhavo bhava pachaya jati pachaya Jara maranang soka parideva dukkha domana supaya sambhavandi eva me sakevala sabkakanda sasamutayo hoti Avijayato eva ase saviraga nirodha sankhara nirodho sankhara nirodha vinyana nirodho vinyana nirodha namarupa nirodho Namarupa nirodha salayatana nirodho salayatana nirodha pasanirodho pasanirodha vedana nirodho vedana nirodha Nirodho tanha nirodha upadana nirodho upadana nirodha bhava nirodho bhava nirodha jati nirodho jati nirodha jara maranang soka parideva dukkha domana supaya sa niruchandi eva me tasa kevala sadukha kandasa nirodho hoti. That was very good. We'll do some meditation first. We'll consider that the Dhamma Talk request has been done, and about 40 minutes from now, we'll have a 40-minute delay before the beginning of the Dhamma Talk. Thank you. before starting the talk for this evening, just invite anybody who needs to take a bio break. I learned that term 6 years ago at Spirit Rock. Bio break. And once everyone's back from the bio break, then we can do the request one more time, because I think others wanted to join in as well. You raise your hand if you were going to request the Dhamma Talk tonight. There's one here, back there as well. Okay. Just want to make sure you're all back from your bio break. Okay, please, I think we can go ahead. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Is today the 11th? No, the 10th. Today's the 10th, I think. The 10th? Yeah. Over halfway through the retreat. So we're on this journey together, and I hope everybody's having a good retreat. I did want to put it out there that one way to judge whether or not you're having a good retreat is not necessarily how much happiness you're experiencing, but so if you're suffering, it doesn't mean you're not having a good retreat. It just means you're suffering. So are you learning something? If you're learning something, you're having a good retreat. So if we can use all of these experiences as a learning experience, because it's difficult, this path of practice, and trying to develop a sense of ease and well-being that's sustainable it takes patient endurance. It does entail at least some, if not a lot, of suffering. And going through that and learning from it. So it's learning how to learn. And if we feel drowsy or we feel hot and tired and not clear, then we can develop that sense of, I mentioned the Thai word, otton, kanti, patient endurance. Kanti is the Pali, so that sense of patient endurance. And what that means is learning how to be okay with the unpleasant, learning how to be fully present with the unpleasant. Not just gritting our teeth and bearing it until it's over, but actually training ourselves. This is a training ourselves to be okay with it. Because no matter what we do, we're going to come up against unpleasantness at some point. And we do, all of us, most of us, if not all of us, are going to experience some unpleasantness every day in our lives at some point throughout the day. And we have cycles through the day. Some of us feel better in the morning. Some of us feel better in the evening. Some of us might feel better midday. So noticing those cycles that we go through every day, that's a great thing to start learning on a retreat. And we're going into Four Noble Truths and dependent origination. Dependent origination is subtle stuff, so not to be dismayed or disheartened if it seems too abstruse or not clear. Very, very subtle stuff. And the Buddha himself didn't really come to that realization of dependent origination until the very end point when he was under the Bodhi tree practicing, coming to an ordered contemplation and analytical meditation on dependent origination, which ended up leading to the disbanding of the whole cycle of dependent origination and then the subsequent liberation, enlightenment, Buddhahood, or what we call arhatship, full awakening, full liberation, the end of suffering. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a practice known as Buddhanusati, or contemplation of the Buddha. And this is something I've used a lot to encourage and inspire myself, especially, say, going to where the Buddha was enlightened in India, in Bodh Gaya, the Bodhi tree, what we call the seat of enlightenment, or the Vajra Asana, where the Buddha had the insight into dependent origination. But before that, so I'll back up to the story of the Buddha's life, the renunciation. And as the story goes, the Buddha was raised in a great luxury, and had plenty of everything, had the best of everything. And historically speaking, he wasn't set to be a conqueror of a huge nation, but he was, they had like chiefdoms or different states in India at that time, different districts. So he was set to, his family was one of the noble families in this district. It was by no means the biggest kingdom in India. The biggest kingdom was the next kingdom over, the kingdom of Magadha. The Buddha grew up as Prince Siddhartha in the kingdom of Kosala, or the district of Kosala, and then the next district over east and a bit north is the kingdom of Magadha. That was the biggest kingdom at the time, and the king of that area was known as King Bimbisara, who features greatly in the suttas. He's a big character in the Buddha's life. So we come to the before the Buddha leaves home, and he actually has to let go of certain things in order to leave home, and in order to be able to leave his family life behind. And so I said he's in his 29th year, so he could have been 28, he could have been 29, somewhere around that age. And from time to time, he would go out of the palace to what's called a pleasure park, and for the days abiding, maybe have a picnic, or we could think of it as just going to the park. But a lot of the realities of old age, sickness, and death were very hidden from him in the type of the life he was leading. But as the story goes, he actually came across an old person and actually was asking his charioteer about this. What's wrong with this person? Well, they're old. Everybody gets old at some point. If they live long enough, if they don't die from some sort of accident, then you too will grow old. And so this deeply affected the young man at this time who became the Buddha. And reflecting on it, this is where our reflection on page 55 in the Chanting book comes in. I am of the nature to age. I too have not gone beyond aging. So that's the reflection that comes up in his mind at that time. I too am of the nature to age. I'm not free of that fate as well. And so then it's said that at that point, the intoxication of youth left his mind. The intoxication of youth faded away from his mind. And then at a later point, he comes across a sick person and similarly reflects, I am of the nature to sicken, I have not gone beyond sickness. And with that reflection, then the intoxication with health fades from his mind. The intoxication with health fades from his mind at that point. Then at a later point, it said he actually came across a dead person and reflected, I too am of the nature to die. I have not gone beyond dying. And at that point, the intoxication with life itself faded from his mind. So that's what we call the three intoxications: the intoxication with youth, the intoxication with health, and the intoxication with life. And so those three intoxications, it said they faded from, we'll call him the Bodhisattva, he's not yet the Buddha, the Bodhisattva, the being who is to be awakened. Those faded from his mind. But then he didn't know what to do with that. He didn't know how to respond to that. So we can imagine that he got a bit depressed. He was in a very pensive mood for a while. And at a later point, wandering in his pleasure park outside of the palace, came across a monk, came across a religious seeker, what we call a samana, practicing meditation, wearing robes, sitting at the foot of a tree and practicing meditation. And then it occurred to him that, okay, this is good. This is the response. When those three intoxications fade away, this is what I have to do. This is the response. So to become the seeker of a way out of the cycle of dissatisfaction and suffering that is just inherent in the world. So that's, at that point, he makes the decision then to leave the home life and become a religious seeker himself. That's also called the four heavenly messengers, or what we call Buddhist angels. Aging, sickness, and death are the first three. So those are the heavenly messengers in Pali. For anybody who likes these Pali terms, Deva Duta. Duta means messenger. Deva is celestial being, heavenly being. So the four heavenly messengers are aging, sickness, death, and the samana, the sign of the samana, or the religious seeker, as the fourth heavenly messenger. And that's the response to the first three. That's what we do to seek a way out when we see suffering, and then we can seek a way out of it. And that's a reality that religious seeker, that's something which exists in all of us. That's a potential which exists in all of us. It's not about externally putting on robes, but it's that heart that follows the scent, saying, this looks like a good direction to go in. The scent of virtue, the scent of goodness. There's something inside us that says, there's something there. It's not just words on a page. There's depth there. There's meaning there. There's something of substance here. And I don't know exactly what it is, but I can just feel it. So then the story continues. The Bodhisattva leaves from the eastern gate of his fortress, of his palace, and travels all the way, it's about 90 miles, to the river Anoja, which, interestingly, on modern maps, it still has the same name. It's still called the River Anoja. It's still a river that's 90 miles east and a bit north of where the Buddha grew up. And that river, at that time, was the dividing line between Kosala and Magadha. So he has to pass into the next district so that he's not pursued. And then on the banks of that river is where he shaves off his hair and beard and we don't know exactly how it happened. He finds some rags to use as robes. That's how I think it happened. In the Thai version, celestial beings come and clothe him with robes. And then the hair floats up into heaven, into a celestial chetty that it's still at. I actually believe that part of it. But the robes, I think with the robes, he actually did find some rags and was wearing rag robes, which would have been the tradition at that time. And we can assume that he found a bowl. Of course, in the Thai story, it's like a celestial bowl appeared in front of him. But I think he actually probably found a bowl somehow, or acquired a bowl somehow. Rag robes. It said that he wore rough hempen rag robes. And then the practice of religious seekers at the time would have been to do the alms round. And so in the commentaries and in the Thai version of the Buddha's biography, it talks about the first time he goes alms round. And he's never done this before. He's never actually, he's lived a life of affluence since his birth. He's never begged for food before. So you can imagine the Buddha was about 6'7", very noble, bearing very strong, and then having put on rag robes and shaved off his hair and beard, taken off all of his princely ornaments, and going on alms round through a village. And it said that people were in awe of him. They didn't know what to do. They were in awe of him. And then people start figuring out, oh, he's some sort of ascetic, but he's a very noble-looking ascetic. And they offer him food, they offer him alms food, and it's all mixed together. He's never eaten his food all mixed together before. It's the first time. And so they're whatever, rice, lentils, whatever, just like the food we're having here at Spirit Rock. It's all mixed together. It's all mixed together. So it's just like a soup that's mixed together in his bowl. And that's where our meal reflection comes from, that we do every day at the monastery. And it's said that the Bodhisattva did that reflection in his mind, that I use alms food not for fun, not for pleasure, not for fattening, not for beautification, only for the maintenance and nourishment of this body, for keeping it healthy, for helping with the holy life, thinking thus, I will allay hunger without overeating, so that I may continue to live blamelessly at ease. And he reflects that that's the appropriate way for a religious seeker to reflect on his food, and that there's no reason to separate it out. It's appropriate that it's all mixed together. So then he takes his meal, and his first dwelling place is up, I believe it's called Mount Pandava, where he climbs up a mountain and he's practicing in either it's a cave or kind of a flat area up on this mountain above this village that he's subsisting on for alms round, and that's the first place he practices, even before going to meet his first two teachers, Alara Kalama and Uddaka Ramaputta. He's actually practicing and essentially learning the ropes of being a religious seeker. And he very quickly, because of his noble demeanor and his noble bearing, this noble ascetic is going alms round in this village. Word makes it back to Rajagaha, the seat of King Bimbisara. And King Bimbisara wants to meet this ascetic. He automatically has faith in him, hearing about him. And so he goes to see, and this is in the Sutta Nipata, the Pabaja Sutta, where it tells about the going forth. It's one of my favorite suttas, where King Bimbisara actually goes to see the Bodhisattva and is wondering where he is, and the people say he's up there on the mountain like a bull elephant, like a tiger, like a lion, sitting and practicing up there. So King Bimbisara goes up and pays respects to him, and is just full of confidence and faith, and just says, you're wearing the robes of a monk, but you look like a noble. Where are you from? And he says, well, I'm from Kosala. I was set to be a king, but I've given that up I am here to renounce sensual pleasures. And King Bimbisara has even more faith, hair standing on end, and he just says, you're more worthy of this kingdom than I am. This is the biggest kingdom in India at the time. He says, you're more worthy of this kingdom than I give you my entire kingdom. Give you my entire kingdom. And he just responds, of course, even more inspiring. Says, I've already given up all kingdoms, and I'm here to renounce all sensual pleasures. So I turn my back on all of these things and keep your kingdom. And so then he's even more inspired and says, if you attain awakening, please consider me to be one of your first students, one of your first disciples. And the Bodhisattva just sort of nods. And then that's the end of that interaction. But he keeps that promise. He actually does. King Bimbisara does end up becoming one of his first students. And that is the precursor to the spread of Buddhism in India. So after that, he has these various teachers. And I'm going to not talk about that so much. But the reason I'm talking about the life of the Buddha before his awakening is because he practiced these severe austerities. So he's with these first two teachers. He equals and even surpasses their attainments. And he finds that that's not yet what he's looking for. That's not yet the deathless. That's not yet full awakening. And so he goes off, he strikes out on his own and thinks maybe through the practice of the severest of austerities. And in Pali, this is called the Dukrakirya practice. Dukrakirya Patipada. And undergoing this practice, he undergoes severe periods of fasting and holding his breath for very long periods of time. And his body is racked with pain and he's starving. And at one point, he gives up all food and probably even water for periods of time, to the point that it's said that he could touch his stomach and feel his spine through his stomach, and that his eyes were sunken way back into his skull, and that his hair fell out, all of his hair fell out from malnutrition, and that he could barely stand and was just shaking, and yet was sitting upright and full of internal brightness and energy. So he wasn't yet doing that contemplation of dependent origination at that time. He was looking, he didn't know that was the path to awakening, but it was just sheer endurance taken to the ultimate point, even to the extent that pushing away any happiness in the mind and seeing any form of happiness, even pure mental happiness, as a danger to what he was doing, and even pushing that away. So the practice he did was so extreme, it's actually unimaginable. And at a certain point, when it's taken to the ultimate point, he reflects that of any ascetic or Brahmin who practices, the pain I've inflicted on myself currently feels like he's being torn apart, ripped apart limb by limb. And that their pain could only equal this, but not greater. No pain could be experienced greater than this. And yet the mind is still not awakened through that sheer endurance. So there must be some other way. So that's where we fast forward then to he actually starts going alms around again and nurses himself back to health and looks for, so indulgence in sensual pleasures isn't the way, but also indulgence in self-mortification is not the way. There must be a middle way. There must be a balance that needs to be striked. And then that's through when we get to the point where the Buddha is sitting under the Bodhi tree in the night of the awakening, or the Bodhisattva is sitting under the Bodhi tree in the night of the awakening, then his mind starts to go into this contemplation of dependent origination. So without what can suffering or death, if he's seeking the deathless, so without what cause can death not arise? Well, without birth, death cannot arise. And then he backs it up with ordered attention to more and more subtle levels till he gets to ignorance. And that with the breaking up of ignorance, the whole cycle breaks apart. So that's the contemplation that comes up on the night of the awakening that leads to the insight into the Four Noble Truths and the disbanding of the whole cycle of dependent origination. The Dhamma, the awakening to reality, the reality of awareness, and what we call Nibbana. That's the goal we're all seeking as practitioners. Nibbana is the final goal of practice. So with that preamble, I thought we could just go into a few of the first stages of dependent origination. We have avijja, paccaya, sankhara. So paccaya means to act as a condition for. Paccaya, we say paccaya as also it means like a requisite, a prerequisite. Avijja, paccaya, sankhara, sankhara, paccaya, vijnanam. So ignorance conditioning sankharas, or we could think of sankharas as conditions or marks. And vijnana is what we translate as consciousness. And this word vijnana is very important because in reflecting on this word, we can actually come to some insight ourselves. And just looking at these first three words can lead to a better understanding of dependent origination as a whole. So if we look at the word vijnana, consciousness, sense consciousness, and we look at jnana means knowing or wisdom. Yeah, we could say it means knowing. Vit means divided. Vit means divided. So vijnana literally means divided knowing. And how is it divided? It's divided into 6. It's divided into eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and then mind consciousness as the 6th. This is a couple more stages down the line. This is the 6 sense bases. So it's vijnana. Then we go nama rupa, which is mentality, materiality, or body and mind. And then salayatana, the 6 sense bases. With that, we have contact. So vijnana, divided knowing. And in the suttas, the way it's worded is every moment of our lives, consciousness is that which experiences. It is the element of experience. It allows us to come into contact with the world, experience the world. And it is the world. The world is our experience of the world. So, for example, the eye consciousness lands on forms. The eye consciousness lands on forms. The ear consciousness lands on sounds, or knows sounds. The eye consciousness knows forms, lands on forms. The ear consciousness knows sounds, lands on sounds. Nose consciousness lands on scents, or knows them. Tongue consciousness lands on taste. Body consciousness lands on tactile sensation. Body consciousness goes out and lands on tactile sensation. Mind consciousness goes out and lands on mental objects, thoughts. So those 6 forms of consciousness, those are all vijnanas. Divided knowing, it's divided into those 6. Every moment of our lives, the awareness is actually, we could say it's flowing out and landing in those different ways at any given moment, even when we're asleep, dreaming. That's, the mind consciousness landing on mental objects. When we're awake, eye consciousness landing on forms, ear consciousness landing on sounds, and so on. And it's very, very quickly going between all those. So when we're looking at something, in that very brief moment, we're not necessarily listening to something. When we're listening to something, in that very brief moment, we're not necessarily seeing something. The consciousness is swirling around like a vortex, super, super fast, at the speed of mind. So it's very, very fast, and it creates a tapestry of experience. So it seems like we're experiencing all of these forms of consciousness at the same time, but it's really like a vortex, and it's creating this tapestry of experience. So that's vijnana, that's divided knowing. That's why when a practitioner enters very deep samadhi, the hearing might shut off. So the mind is completely on a meditation object, the hearing might shut off, because then the consciousness isn't going into that at all. It's more still, it's more focused, and so on. And so the Buddha's talking about vijnana, and I'm going into this in depth because it's very good to understand this term. And liberation is when the knowing doesn't land anywhere. We can use that as a reflection, as a contemplation. That moment of liberation is when we get to the point where the knowing doesn't flow out, where it doesn't land anywhere. And we can't conceptualize that because the very act of conceptualization is mind consciousness landing on a mind object, right? So we can't conceptualize that. So where the knowing doesn't land anywhere, where the knowing comes back and completely stays in itself, that's the moment of liberation. And we can't do that by an act of will. Anything we will, anything we intend, it's going to land somewhere. It's going to land somewhere. So that's where the Noble Eightfold Path comes in. The Noble Eightfold Path and our whole life, our whole path of practice is geared toward preparing the mind for that moment. But for now, it's good to contemplate, it's good to think about that as a potential, as a possibility. So according to the tenets of Theravada Buddhism, that would happen the first time at the moment of stream entry, the first stage of awakening, the first stage of enlightenment, entering the stream of the Dhamma, where the mind that happens to the mind for the first time. It gets to the point of not landing anywhere. And then when that happens, it's said that the mind then, it's like a rubber band, it snaps back into its old form of experience, but something is much different after that. Actually, everything is different because entering the stream of the Dhamma means the mind flips and it's flowing in the opposite direction that it's been flowing before. Ajahn Chah would describe this, that it's like everybody in the world is seeing things one way and then you're seeing things a different way. And it's not that you've gone crazy. It might seem like that for a bit, but it's actually wisdom. It's wisdom. You've seen the Dhamma, so we take this as a reflection as well. So we can't get there by an act of will, but it's all about the path. It's all about following the path. So there is a certain amount of faith necessary here. There is a certain amount of blind belief, but it's not completely blind because we're following a scent. We think there's something here. I sense that there's something here. There is depth here. There is meaning here, but I'm not 100% sure. But it's enough that I'm going to move in this direction. And it's also helpful to meet inspiring examples of people who seem to have gotten to this point. So Ajahn Amaro got the chance to meet Ajahn Chah. Ajahn Amaro was one of the last monks who was personally ordained by Ajahn Chah. actually. And I was, of course, too young to ever meet Ajahn Chah, but I got to meet Ajahn Liam and some of the other greats who are still around. And it just, for myself, it gives me a bright faith and say, there's something there. This person is not just, it's not ordinary. It's not just, this isn't just another person. There's depth there. There's something very special there. There's something extraordinary there with these people. So when we think about dependent origination, ignorance is actually, we want to objectify ignorance. We want to objectify the knowing. But the knowing, it can only be known by its function, which is to know. It's not like a ball of light in your mind, or it's not the pineal gland, or, it has no physical basis. It's not something we can objectify. And the knowing is just the knowing. It just knows. It's known by its function. And similarly, ignorance, avijja, some of you may be familiar with Sanskrit. Vijja means, say, true knowledge, which in Sanskrit is vidya, as in the word vidyadhara, knowledge bearer. So avijja, or lack of true knowledge, what we translate as ignorance. Then we have this quality of sati, or mindfulness. And mindfulness, it's not that we see ignorance, but it's that with the most purified forms of mindfulness, ignorance is not there. So ignorance is an absence of mindfulness. There's no seeing ignorance because the act of seeing is the opposite of ignorance. So ignorance is not seeing. We could say that way. That's one way to think of it. Ignorance is not seeing, or not seeing clearly. And then when there is vision, when there is true vision, true knowledge through mindfulness, so it would be like, you could think of ignorance as darkness. And then when there's darkness everywhere and then you turn on a light, you can't see the darkness. There's only light at that point. So when we shine the light in this way through mindfulness, then ignorance would be nowhere to be seen. And that's why it's said that one of the epithets for the Arhat, for a fully enlightened being, is that they are one who is always mindful. So for them, ignorance, there's no more ignorance. So that's one way to think about ignorance. We think of it as darkness, and darkness that just disappears when the light is shown. So through that lack of seeing, through that lack of knowledge, that very darkness, or that very lack of seeing, is what gives rise to that whole cycle. That's what gives rise to sankhara, to marks, to differentiation. That's what gives rise to vijnana, to the divided knowing, which gives rise to the salayatana, the six sense bases, contact, feeling, craving, and so on. Birth, aging, sickness and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair, and the whole mass of suffering, what we call the dukkha khanda, the mass of suffering. So it's very, very, very subtle stuff. This is very subtle stuff. So we use this for reflection, contemplation. And the Noble Eightfold Path can be summarized as Sila, Samadhi, Panya. That's virtue, meditation, wisdom, discernment. Sila, Samadhi, Panya. And that Sila, Samadhi, Panya is to see anicca, dukkha, anatta. That's the impermanence, suffering, non-self, or the three characteristics of all conditioned existence. And through seeing those three conditions of existence, there can be letting go. So I'm just putting that out there. This is basic tenets of Theravada Buddhism. To be able to practice to the point of starting to intuit some of these things, we need to have quite a bit of encouragement. We need to have quite a bit of encouragement because it can seem daunting. To be able to do something even close to what the Buddha did in, say, the legend of the Buddha's life story can seem very, very daunting. So we need to find ways to encourage ourselves. Two of the ways we can do that is through the patient endurance, through the practice of Khanti. So when things get difficult or we get discouraged, we become dismayed, we think there's not really a way forward, we can fall back on that contemplation of endurance and say, well, this is unpleasant, but can I be present for this? And then the other way to encourage ourselves is to meditate daily, and we will experience joy. If we meditate daily, we can't not make progress. And this, the Thai meditation masters give this teaching as one very senior monk who passed away in early 2020, Ajahn Ban. He has this teaching where he said, if you meditate every day, if you practice every day, you can't not make progress. So when we do these retreats, for example, this is something which can encourage us in our life of Dhamma, help us to keep moving forward. We can encourage ourselves and say, okay, well, even if it's difficult, maybe there's a little bit more mindfulness than before. Can think about the life of the Buddha not as just a fairy tale, but try to imagine what it was like to be alive back then, 2,500 years ago, and say, this is, imagine that it's real, and this is very inspiring. Or we can even look at the life of Ajahn Chah, for anybody who's read his biography, Stillness Flowing. And I find that incredibly inspiring and encouraging. Ajahn Chah was a human being. He had defilements and issues just like all of us, and he had incredible obstacles, seemingly insurmountable at times in his life. And yet he kept at it, he kept practicing. He had a lot of health problems through his life, and he didn't live that long. The last 14 years of his life, he was incredibly ill. The last 9 years of his life, he was fully paralyzed. And I think he died, he was 74 or something. Yeah. So that's incredibly inspiring, the way Ajahn Chah lived his life, chose to live his life. And then he took his inspiration from these stories about the Buddha. And he also took his inspiration from meeting his own teachers, Ajahn Mun, Ajahn Tongrat, and Ajahn Kinnery, and he had other teachers as well. So there's a lot there. There's depth there. And Ajahn Chah was not an educated person, so it doesn't take like a college education to really get this stuff. It takes practice. It takes diligent practice. Ajahn Chah was known to say, if you get a bachelor's degree, your defilements get a bachelor's degree. If you get a master's degree, your defilements get a master's degree. If you get a doctorate, your defilements get a doctorate. So we have to be careful because the more educated we get, the more we'll be able to justify these things. So we have to be careful. And since Jill quoted Ajahn Buddhadasa, I'll also do an Ajahn Buddhadasa quote, that you have to be at least 10% stupid to practice. Did you know that one? So yeah, we can use these things to really encourage ourselves, to simplify the mind, just simplify things, and whatever comes up, not to be dismayed, not to be discouraged, because as long as we're trying our best, as long as we're keeping the precepts, as long as we're trying to really keep a practice going, even just thinking about the Dhamma, even if we miss our meditation practice for a day or 2 days or a week or a month, or a year, or longer, we could still think about the Dhamma. Just remember it, just recollect it. And I think for myself, I've felt dismayed and discouraged at times. I've lost the plot in 21 years. Actually, my bhikkhu birthday is coming up on July 13th. I'll turn 21, but I feel I've lost the plot so many times, and then had to really work to regain it. And so, whether we're wearing robes or not, then we do need to find ways to do these contemplations. Think about that term, vijnana. Try to inspire the mind. Try to think of the life of the Buddha and the life of Ajahn Chah and these forest masters, and use that to encourage ourselves. So these are just a few words to give encouragement to all of you. We're over halfway through the retreat, and also I just want to say sadhu. Yeah, I think you're all doing well and good. Even if you're not doing well, you're still here. You're still here. So that's good. That's good. That means you're doing well enough, learning how to endure. So yeah, I'll leave it there this evening. We've all had a long day, so it's be nice, I think, just to leave it there. And we can have the closing. Sadhu. And we'll end with the chant on page 33 of the Brown Chanting Book, Book 1. Verses of sharing and aspiration. Now let us chant the verses of sharing and aspiration. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother, my father, and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest gods and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life. May they soon attain the threefold bliss and realize the deathless through the goodness that arises from my practice. And through this act of sharing, May all desires and attachments quickly cease, and all harmful states of mind, until I realize Nibbana in every kind of birth. May I have an upright mind, with mindfulness and wisdom, austerity and vigor. May the forces of delusion not take hold, nor weaken my resolve. The Buddha is my excellent refuge. Unsurpassed is the protection of the Dhamma. The solitary Buddha is my noble guide. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, may darkness and delusion be dispelled. And the closing homage is in English is page 28, 29, something like that. The Lord, the perfectly enlightened and blessed One, I render homage to the Buddha, the blessed One. The teaching so completely explained by him, I bow to the Dhamma. The Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, I bow to the Sangha.
Thank you for listening. To learn how you can support the teachers and Dharma Seed, please visit dharmaseed.org.